There's something about indie games that hits different, right? The creativity, the risks, stuff that bigger studios just don't attempt as much. These are the kinds of titles that made me rethink everything games could do, whether through storytelling, mechanics, or just pure vibe. So here are 20 indie games that, in one way or another, redefined gaming for me. Maybe they caught you off guard too, or changed how you looked at the industry altogether. So, let's get started. Let's kick things off with Limbo. Now, where do you even start when you talk about Limbo? This one really shifted how players looked at indie games. Before Limbo, people kind of saw indie titles as these small-scale experiments. Then Limbo came along with its creepy black and white aesthetic, minimalism, and strange, eerie puzzles. No dialogue, no clear direction, just a kid on a journey through a twisted world. All of a sudden, you weren't just playing a game. You were experiencing something more, something unsettling, even emotional. But here's the thing, where Limbo really nailed it was in atmosphere. Everything is stripped down, yet everything matters. The use of shadow and sound guides you in subtle ways, creating something that feels claustrophobic yet expansive. It brought attention to the fact that you don't need a huge budget or advanced graphics to create tension. The simple black and white graphics added layers of depth without ever getting too complicated. Every animation feels essential, every movement precise. There's no wasted space. You're always on edge, figuring out what just happened and how to deal with what's next. And then there's the eeriness. That whole game feels like a nightmare you just can't wake up from. This sense of helplessness stuck with people long after turning off the console. Limbo turned heads toward the idea that indie games could handle mature, complex themes without spelling everything out for you.
A lot less to worry about in this one than there is in regular difficulty.
Cuphead. All anyone had to do was take one look at Cuphead and they were hooked. That vintage 1930s cartoon vibe, like the kind of thing you'd see in old TV reels, no one had really captured that in a game before. The hand-drawn animation feels fluid in a way that blends beautifully with the chaos of the boss fights. You're dodging bullets and lasers while marveling at how every character moves, stretches, and squashes like they're straight out of an old rubber hose style animation. And talk about the gameplay. Cuphead is a lesson in throwing you into the fire and not caring whether you get burned. Every level, every boss fight, it's this wild dance of learning attack patterns and reacting at the speed of light. You fail, then you fail again. But when you finally nail that perfect run, it feels unreal. Cuphead proved that games could blend challenging gameplay with a uniquely retro look, like no other game before. People didn't just fall in love with it for the difficulty, which is killer, or the co-op gameplay, or even the bosses that felt like themes unto themselves. They fell in love with the complete package, from the music that rocks those jazzy big band notes to the meticulously crafted backgrounds. Every little detail feels intentional. The mix of cartoon nostalgia and brutal difficulty gave players a ride they didn't see coming. Cook it all together, and Cuphead marched its way onto this list because it revived a whole art style while still demanding your full attention from start to finish. It created a niche for itself that few games ever could. Next up is Hollow Knight. Now, if Metroidvania games are your thing, Hollow Knight probably left a significant mark. There's something kind of mesmerizing in how the game melds beautifully hand-drawn backgrounds with sharp, tough-as-nails gameplay. You wander through Hallownest, this vast, haunting kingdom filled with dangerous enemies and secrets hiding in every corner. It's familiar at first, but then Hollow Knight just keeps expanding, deepening, introducing new areas that feel like living, breathing sketches pulled from a dark fairy tale. What makes Hollow Knight fit here is how it redefines the genre. It doesn't just give you an adventure with challenging bosses. It kind of feels like you're discovering the world and its rules organically. The game lets you figure out where you are, piece together the story, and uncover each layer of its world. With very little hand-holding, it tells you, here's your sword, now go explore. And you do, but you'll quickly realize just how much nuance goes into the combat. What starts as a simple hack and slash quickly evolves into this intricate dance of dodging, swapping spells, upgrading charms, and perfecting your moves for that one perfect run. And while the challenge absolutely gets your blood pumping, the quiet moments between battles, they hit differently. You find yourself pausing just to look at the hand-drawn environments, trying to make sense of the entire maze-like structure. Hollow Knight's sheer density is what makes it so impressive, and few games combine difficulty, exploration, and narrative so seamlessly. It's not just a Metroidvania, it's a whole universe waiting for you to get lost in. Next up, we have Hotline Miami. Now, Hotline Miami does something crazy, something you don't really expect the first time you pick it up. It's brutal, sure. You blast your way through neon-lit levels with fast, almost surgical precision. But it's the rhythm of it. Like everything is moving to the beat of that synth-heavy soundtrack. Each level kind of tells you what to do through the music, like it was designed to amp you up at just the right moments, pulling you into this hyper-violent ballet. You're not just playing a game of reflexes, you're vibing in sync with the chaos unfolding on screen. And see, that's part of what makes it feel different. The top-down shooting genre wasn't exactly new, but Hotline Miami feels more like an experience you flow through. Split-second decisions, constantly walking this line between life and death, all while exploding into flashes of neon and blood. That sense of speed, of needing to move faster than you can even plan for, suddenly every misstep feels almost intentional, as if the game is teaching you to fail before you can succeed. The visual aesthetic too, nothing subtle about it. It leans all the way into these hyper-saturated colors and glitchy TV grain. Add the cryptic, sometimes unsettling plot that almost feels like a fever dream. It's not trying to hold your hand. Nope. It pushes you into its world and expects you to fight your way out, all while making it nearly impossible to shake that pulsing soundtrack long after you've turned off the game. Ori and the Blind Forest could have been just another platformer, but instead, it feels like you've dipped into a living painting. Every frame drips with visual beauty, like someone spent hours carefully brushing colors over each part of the landscape. It's not just there to look pretty though. The world reacts and feels alive, with fluid character animations that blend seamlessly into the environment. And while the art is captivating, it's how the game manages to tell a deeply emotional story without relying too heavily on words that really sticks. From the very first moments, those quiet, beautiful opening scenes set the tone for the entire journey. Ori isn't just running through forests filled with enemies. You're invested. There's a vulnerability in the gameplay that mirrors Ori's character arc as you grow stronger, making those tough platforming sections hit harder. The design allows you to tackle challenges in this flowy, elegant way. Each movement, the dashes and jumps, becomes part of the story you're creating on screen. Then there's the way the environment speaks. The lush, dreamlike forest sharply contrasts with the darker, more threatening areas. Combined with a score that sweeps in at all the right moments, it's constantly tugging at your emotions. Ori opened the door to how a platformer could also tell a profound, heartfelt story, without sacrificing any of the tough-as-nails difficulty seasoned players crave either. It feels like art, it plays like a dream, and yet it matches the emotional intensity of something much bigger.
It's actually pretty damn cold out here.
Roger that. Warms up fast. The mornings are cold in Boulder though, right?
Yeah, they are.
Coming up next is Firewatch. Firewatch does something games hadn't really tapped into before. It brings the personal drama out of big landscapes. You're all alone, walking through these vast, beautiful natural spaces, yet it's not the birds chirping or towering trees you remember most. It's those moments of isolation punctuated by your conversations with Delilah over the radio, and the way that changes the entire experience of exploration. There's a coziness in how the game world just feels like a place you can retreat to, hike through, and marvel at, while the underlying tension keeps you wondering what's bubbling beneath the surface. Most first-person games focus on guns or puzzles, but Firewatch is different. It's all about that dialogue. The witty, sometimes lonely exchanges feel entirely natural, like you're genuinely getting to know someone miles away who's sharing in this strange summer job. The world, too, is more subtle in how it draws you in. You feel like there's something to explore beyond just what's happening in the plot. It's in these quiet moments with nature where your thoughts can wander. The landscape almost feels like a character itself, changing with time and the seasons around you. Firewatch paved a new way for games to tell stories by trusting the player with something deeper. Emotional tension created through quiet exploration and conversation. It's personal and immersive in a way most games forget. The serene beauty of the forests hides an undercurrent of something you can't quite place, but it makes you want to keep going to see what you discover next. Up next, we have Night in the Woods. This game taps into a different kind of personal storytelling. Rather than focusing on high-stakes drama or saving the world, you're returning to a small town that feels stale and suffocating in its ordinariness. And that's where it stands out. This game does a deep dive into the mundane. You're walking through autumn leaves, talking to old friends, taking part in everyday interactions. The town of Possum Springs feels lived in, not like a backdrop, but like a character with its mix of closed-down storefronts, incomplete construction sites, and lost dreams. The writing, though, that's where it really clicks. You find yourself relating to, or at least recognizing, May and her circle of friends because their conversations might remind you of your own moments of drifting through young adult life. Topics of depression, financial struggles, and failing relationships sneak into the everyday interactions, making you understand that this isn't just an adventure. It's a reflection of real, messy life. The addition of minigames might seem lighthearted on the surface, but they also feed back into the narrative since they give weight to those small-town days filled with boredom and brief, fleeting excitement. It's influential because it shows how games can tell smaller, more grounded stories without losing any emotional depth. By narrowing its scope to mental health and personal struggle, Night in the Woods created something that speaks to the challenges of facing your past and future as one blended, uncertain mess. Next on the list is Gris. Gris takes you on an artistic journey where every frame feels meticulously crafted, almost as if the game world has come straight out of a watercolor painting. But it's not just the visuals, it's the emotional weight that creeps in through soft, muted tones and the delicate way the landscape shifts in response to your progress. No dialogue, no overt storytelling. The game expresses grief, growth, and beauty through its changing environments and subtle visual cues as you're navigating crumbling structures to find color and restore the world around you. What really makes Gris feel impactful, though, is this interplay between its narrative and design. The game leaves so much up to interpretation, yet still manages to keep you emotionally engaged with every step, every platforming challenge you overcome. As different colors and elements of the world gradually return, the game blooms into the emotional core it had been quietly building, without ever having to spell it out. It's a meditative experience, paced by an ambient soundtrack that sweeps you from one elegantly broken space to the next. Never rushing, always thoughtful. You're not handed a story here. You're coaxed into feeling something, experiencing something uniquely personal. That mix of art, music, and open-to-interpretation storytelling showed that you don't need complex mechanics or dialogue to create something profound. Gris isn't just a platformer, it's a visual poem, one that stays with you long after the journey's over. Next up, we have Eastshade. Eastshade does something very few games even attempt. It pulls away from all the usual mechanics of conflict and combat. Instead, it's almost entirely focused on exploration and self-expression. You're wandering through a beautiful open world, not for the sake of collecting items or defeating enemies, but to paint. Every landscape and village you stumble into has its own charm, and your goal? Just to capture the world's beauty through your canvas. It's a pacifist's dream game where creativity becomes your main interaction with the world. That's what's so fresh about Eastshade. Rather than relying on shortcuts like battle mechanics or time challenges to keep the pace going, players are given time to just be. To take in the scenery, to talk with strange characters and solve problems through art rather than force. Every location presents these peaceful moments of introspection, making you feel like you're a part of something calm rather than something chaotic. And the art mechanics themselves, not overly complex, but rich enough to make you want to paint everything you see, provide a unique sense of purpose. The fact that your paintings are traded and shared with locals for favors or goods ties it all back together. Combatless games aren't unheard of, but Eastshade takes it to another level by saying that creative expression is all you need to move forward. It's a rare world of endless inspiration, one that beckons you to slow down and notice the small things. Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons. Hands down, one of the most creative approaches to controlling gaming comes from Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons. You're using a single controller to move two characters, one stick for each brother. It's almost like a co-op experience, but you're doing it solo, which immediately adds this whole emotional layer to the mechanics. The brothers are on a journey to save their father, and as you switch between them to solve puzzles, you begin to feel the bond between them not just in the story, but in how every puzzle forces the two to work together. It's about family before you even realize it. The way the game explores loss and hardship feels subtle. It doesn't bash you over the head with big dramatic moments. Instead, it uses simple interactions to tug at your heart. The updated version brought a lot of polish to the original concept. Smoother controls, sharper visuals, but what stands out remains unchanged, that feeling of connection with both characters. Let's not forget that stunning world design, which makes the game feel like a fairy tale, with environments that constantly evolve the story. Whether you're climbing a snow-covered mountain or gliding along a river, there's this understated beauty that makes you care about their journey that much more. The remake improved these visuals and mechanics, making everything feel even more fluid and smooth. While it enhances a lot from the original, it still manages to keep that core element intact, where the two brothers' journey stays both deeply personal and mechanically clever. Up next is my friend Pedro. Now, my friend Pedro swings in with a completely different energy. No subtlety here, just flashy, adrenaline-pumping gunfights as you flip through the air, roll off walls, and rain bullets down on enemies. It isn't your typical shooter, though. The thing that really makes Pedro stand out is how much finesse you have over every move. It's not just about aiming and shooting. You're basically performing a dance with every gunfight, stringing together acrobatic stunts and slow-motion kills like it's your own personal action movie. That's where my friend Pedro gets its edge, the fluidity and control. You enter a room full of bad guys, and suddenly you're flipping off walls, diving through windows, dodging bullets, all within seconds. The slow-motion mechanics spice things up, making every action feel deliberate, even poetic. And the quirky tone brings a sense of humor that balances out the cascading violence. From bouncing bullets off frying pans to riding a skateboard while gunning down enemies, Pedro constantly finds new ways to get you grinning. It's more than just a chaotic shooter. It's stylish, kinetic, and polished to the max. Even as you're spraying bullets across the screen with reckless abandon, you feel like an expert acrobat timing every move flawlessly. It's the type of game that makes you want to replay levels over and over just to see how cool you can make each run look. Next up is Disco Elysium. This game flips the entire concept of RPGs on its head, and it's about as far from my friend Pedro as you can get, giving you a world driven entirely by your choices. And not simple binary choices, but deeply complex, morally gray decisions that completely shift how the game unfolds. You're given an incredibly flawed character, a half-broken detective, literally piecing together his identity as he tries to solve a murder. There's no big combat system here. Instead, everything is about dialogue and how you build your character's abilities, which in turn influence how you think, speak, and act within the game world. It's in this sprawling, reactive dialogue system that Disco Elysium argues for a new kind of role-playing. Every conversation is filled with political undertones, psychological depth, and philosophical tangents that make you question not just your character's decisions, but your own views. The freedom this game gives you to explore or completely derail your detective journey is unparalleled. You can lean into corruption, become a hero, or get lost in completely unrelated pursuits, and it always feels like the world around you is adapting. What sets it apart from traditional RPGs is how seamlessly it allows you to sink into your role, pushing every boundary through writing alone. The intensity and depth of material rarely seen in games become its core mechanic. It's up to you how personal, wild, or grounded the journey becomes, making Disco Elysium less about combat and more about confronting every dark corner of the human condition in the wildest ways possible. Katana Zero isn't just about slicing through enemies with a katana like a traditional action platformer. It takes things one step further with a kind of brutal elegance. The mix of fast-paced combat with a rewind and retry time mechanic gives every battle this cinematic flow. You slow down time, dodge bullets midair, and parry attacks right before delivering that one-hit kill. It's all about precision and timing. The game makes you feel like you're executing these flawless, stylish takedowns, but you're also mentally running through possible moves, like you're choreographing your own action movie scenes. And then there's the narrative, which sucker punches you when you least expect it. This isn't just a hack and slash about tearing through rooms full of bad guys. There's a deep psychological story behind the action, one that pulls in themes of trauma, addiction, and mental breakdowns. The aesthetic adds this heavy, gritty vibe, with neon lighting and smoky, dark hallways that give everything a dystopian feel. while the synth-heavy soundtrack pulses behind every slow-motion dismemberment. It feels atmospheric without ever stealing the focus from the action. The mix of intense swordplay and a storyline dunked in mystery and shattered realities makes Katana Zero a standout. You're not just mastering the combat, you're diving into a world where there's more to every swing of the katana and every room full of enemies waiting to be dissected. Next up, we have Risk of Rain 2. When Risk of Rain made its leap from 2D to 3D, it didn't just switch up the visuals, it leveled up the entire roguelike experience. What made the original addictive, the looping progression, where death sends you right back to the start, became something even bigger and more intense in 3 dimensions. You're not just platforming from left to right anymore. You're dropped into sprawling alien environments that stretch out all around you, forcing you to watch every direction rather than just what's ahead. And that feeling of being surrounded really ups the tension, since mixing roguelike elements with full 3D gameplay makes every moment essential, every weapon drop, every item even more crucial to your survival. The multiplayer aspect really cranked things up. Solo sessions are already a challenge, but Risk of Rain 2 brings in that chaotic, shared tension when playing with friends. You're constantly juggling between personal upgrades and teammate needs, which adds layers to how you approach each run. It's more than just trying to stay alive for another minute. You're figuring out how to build synergy with your team while everything around you keeps getting deadlier. Hordes of enemies hit harder with each run, and it's all about balancing speed, teamwork, and quick decisions. Even though it takes the core mechanics of the original, Risk of Rain 2 feels completely fresh in this new 3D playground. The constant evolution of enemies, gear, and arenas keeps bringing players back, pushing them to survive just one more round in an ever-darkening storm of chaos. Next on the list is Cult of the Lamb. This one blends 2 very different styles and somehow makes it work like magic. On one hand, you've got this cute, vibrant world filled with cartoonish critters who look plucked straight out of some lighthearted adventure. But behind those cutesy designs, you're managing a full-blown cult. That contrast between aesthetic and theme is a big part of Cult of the Lamb's charm. While you're crashing through dungeons, fighting off creatures, and gathering resources, you're also sneaking back to your creepy little commune, where you oversee followers, perform rituals, and deal with internal conflicts, as a lamb. Managing followers adds an interesting loop to the rogue-like dungeon crawling. You're investing in both combat progression as well as maintaining the loyalty, devotion, and structure of your flock. Building up your base, gathering resources, and dictating some pretty intense sacrificial ceremonies adds this whole other layer of strategy. You're making sure your cult runs smoothly even as you dive into dangerous dungeon runs. The stakes of failure go beyond simple defeat. Lose a major battle and your followers' faith can waver, or worse, they'll revolt, turning your cute village into a mess of dissent and chaos. That balance between farm life simulation and fast-paced roguelike combat is what sets this apart. Each genre feeds into the other in a way that feels surprisingly natural. In other hands, this combination could have been jarring, but Cult of the Lamb makes it look seamless. It carves out a unique place in the roguelike space by making sure both sides, cult management and combat, pay off, leaving you to juggle loyalty, resources, and battles in a world where cute can turn sinister in no time. Quite the combination.
You remember our venerable house, opulent and imperial.
Coming up next is The Darkest Dungeon. Darkest Dungeon reaches into a deeper, more psychological side of RPGs. Sure, it's got your standard party-based adventuring, heavy on hitting monsters, collecting loot, but what makes it special is the way it piles stress on you as much as your team. Dungeon crawling takes a toll here. Every enemy encounter and flooded hallway saps your hero's resolve, driving them to develop phobias, paranoia, or even become disloyal. The moments where you're sputtering forward, your party barely holding it together, feel realer than most RPG heroics. You aren't just battling enemies, you're battling fatigue, dread, and the downward spirals your survivors are always teetering on. The thing that really sticks, though, is the risk-reward balance. Each run puts you in control, deciding whether to push your stressed group further into danger for better rewards, or retreat before someone snaps and throws the whole team into chaos. It's a masterclass in brutal decision-making. And it's reinforced by a combat system where positioning, ability synergies, and character quirks turn every skirmish into a mental chess match, calculating how to outlast monsters that are actively working to break your team's morale, not just their HP. The stress meter might be one of the boldest experiments in RPG mechanics, transforming what could be a standard crawl into a psychological grind where every battle feels like barely surviving. This mental strain made Darkest Dungeon a touchstone in the genre, one that moodily redefined how players prepare for and accept failure. Dungeon crawling became less about endless loot, and more about holding on to something human amidst all that darkness. Up next, we have Slay the Spire. Slay the Spire is like that one quiet, unexpected game that starts a wildfire. At first glance, it's just another deck-building RPG, but after a few runs, you realize it's a total game changer within its genre. What Slay the Spire does so well is synergize the deck-building mechanics with roguelike elements, forming this addicting loop where you plan out your strategy like a card game, but have to adapt on the fly like a roguelike, because the Spire's changing. Every battle, every decision builds toward your deck, and different paths offer unique rewards or brutal challenges that can make or break your run. Where things get interesting is how every deck construction feels personal. You're constantly torn between choices, whether to build an army of wild attacks, stack up defense cards, or focus on status effects like poison. The strategy keeps shifting, making each run feel fresh and unpredictable. But the real beauty of the design is the pacing. There's never a dull moment because you're constantly adapting your playstyle based on what cards are up next. Even the simple act of facing a random event in the Spire feels calculated. You're always weighing risk versus reward in split-second decisions. It's no surprise that Slay the Spire keeps getting name-dropped in conversations about roguelikes or deck builders. It created a deep strategic system that's engaging for both seasoned players and newcomers alike. There's a reason it's been such a touchstone for the genre. It's one of those games where every player walkthrough feels uniquely theirs, and that's something you rarely get out of card-based mechanics. Next up, we have Outer Wilds. Outer Wilds takes space exploration and flips it. You're dropped into a clockwork solar system where time loops every 22 minutes, and instead of pointing you toward objectives, it asks you to figure out what's even happening as you go. That's where the game really stands out. You're not guided by quest markers or told what to do next. Discovery feels earned. You stumble upon wrecked ships, cryptic texts, and strange planetary phenomena, piecing together an overarching mystery just by exploring. The game trusts you to be curious, and it's that lack of hand-holding that creates a deeply immersive experience. And that solar system, it feels alive in a way few game worlds do. Each planet has its own bizarre rules and behaviors, perfectly synced within the time loop. You've got brittle structures that crumble away with each loop, a planet slowly filling with sand, and a pair of twin planets swapping matter through a massive funnel of debris and atmosphere. This constant change means every loop feels unique. You revisit places not just to see them again, but because you know something specific will be happening there at a particular moment. It's like learning the rhythm of the galaxy. This small world charm paired with the mind-bending shifts in physics and time loop mechanics makes Outer Wilds more than a game. It feels like an invitation to embrace the unknown. By pushing the boundaries of exploration at your own pace, Outer Wilds made sure you weren't just playing to win. You were playing to understand the universe itself. Next up is Hades. When Hades hit the scene, it completely sparked fresh life into the roguelike genre. At its core, you've got the tried and true elements: deep combat mechanics, dying and restarting from scratch, procedurally generated rooms. But it's how those mechanics are tied into one overarching story that makes Hades feel revolutionary. Traditionally, roguelikes reset everything each time you die. Hades flips that on its head, where dying becomes part of the narrative. You're the son of Hades, escaping the underworld, and each time you fail, the story builds. Characters remember your last attempt, react to your progress, and the world keeps evolving. That's what makes Hades so engaging. The layers of storytelling work perfectly with the endlessly replayable combat. Each bout through the underworld feels distinctive, not just because of your builds and tools, but because every failure and success moves the narrative forward. And combat itself? Tight, fast, and deeply rewarding. Weapons have weight, abilities can change the flow of a fight, and the gods themselves offer power-ups that drastically alter the direction of each run. Those personal touches, like the constant dialogue with characters and progressive storylines, make Hades more than a loop of death and regeneration. The tone perfectly balances humor and emotion, giving players motivation motivation to keep pushing themselves through those difficult runs. It's a roguelike with heart, and it delivers a sense of progression far beyond what many expected from the genre. By blending rapid, fluid combat with a constantly shifting story rooted in Greek mythology, Hades redefined how roguelikes could tell stories without sacrificing the challenge and pacing. Last but not least, we have Stray. Stray did something no other game had quite achieved. Put you in the paws of a curious cat in a cyberpunk world. That's probably why it took the internet by storm. Cats have always been a staple of internet culture, but making them the protagonists of a game in such a meticulously designed world, that was something special. The game offers more than just a cute premise. It lets you see the world from a cat's eye view, meaning you're not just running around, but navigating spaces the way a cat would, through narrow alleyways, ducts, and high-up ledges, interacting with robots, solving puzzles, and just being a cat. And that's where Stray becomes more than a gimmick. The blend of exploration and environment design perfectly complements the animal behavior mechanics: meowing, scratching on surfaces, curling up in cozy spots. These moments sprinkle in just the right amount of whimsical detail without pulling you out of its melancholic dystopian story world. The game masterfully wraps these moments around a narrative rich in atmosphere, a decaying, futuristic city with a deep sense of mystery. You're not some ultimate hero charging in to save the day. You're just a creature trying to find its way back home. That understated simplicity resonated with players, showing that an emotional thread could tie gameplay and exploration together. Even in a somber cyberpunk setting, Stray stands out because it flipped the perspective, making you explore a well-worn genre from an entirely fresh angle, both literally and emotionally. And there you have it, folks. If any of these titles struck a chord with you, or if there's one that should be on this list, let's talk about it in the comments. And hey, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.